Imagine you're leading one of the most powerful armies on Earth. You have more soldiers, more tanks, more aircraft, more money. And yet, there is one small country in Europe you would never want to invade. Not because you couldn't, not because it's impossible, but because the cost might simply be too high. For centuries, Switzerland has remained independent while empires rose and fell around it. It survived political upheaval. It survived 2 world wars. And somehow, a country of fewer than 10 million people convinced the world that attacking it simply wasn't worth it. But why? What makes Switzerland different? And how did this small nation become one of the most difficult countries in the world to conquer? The answer isn't as simple as mountains, soldiers, or bunkers. In fact, the real story begins long before any of those things existed. So, let's rewind. Long before Switzerland became known for luxury watches, chocolate, and private banks, long before tourists arrived to admire its mountains, and long before the country became a symbol of stability, Europe looked very different. Powerful kingdoms fought for territory. Empires expanded across the continent. Borders changed constantly. And war was often a normal part of life. In a world like that, small countries rarely stayed independent for long, especially those surrounded by larger and more powerful neighbors. If you look at a map, Switzerland doesn't seem like a country that should have survived. It has no coastline, no vast natural resources, and no massive population. Yet somehow, it endured, while kingdoms disappeared, while empires collapsed, and while entire regions were redrawn by war. Switzerland remained, and that's where the mystery begins. Because Switzerland didn't become secure by accident. Its survival was shaped by centuries of geography, politics, preparation, and careful decision-making. But before we talk about military strategy, before we talk about hidden bunkers, and before we talk about one of the most ambitious defense plans in modern history, we need to talk about the mountains. Because the story of Switzerland cannot be told without them. The Alps cover much of the country. Today, millions of people travel here every year. They come for the scenery, the skiing, the hiking trails, and the peaceful landscapes. To tourists, the mountains are beautiful, but to military planners, they tell a completely different story. They see narrow valleys, steep terrain, limited routes, natural barriers, and one of the most defensible environments in Europe. Imagine trying to move thousands of soldiers through mountain passes. Imagine transporting fuel, ammunition, food, and equipment through roads surrounded by high ground. Every bridge becomes important. Every road becomes important, because if even one of them is lost, entire routes can become unusable. For any invading army, the mountains would create a serious challenge. But geography alone doesn't explain Switzerland's story. History has shown that even the strongest natural defenses can eventually be overcome. And that's exactly why Switzerland needed something more. Something that would make any invasion far more complicated than it appeared. And that brings us to one of the most interesting questions in modern European history. During World War II, Switzerland found itself surrounded by Nazi-controlled territory. Germany was to the north, Italy was to the south, and much of Europe had already fallen. So if Switzerland was such a small country, why wasn't it invaded? During World War II, Switzerland found itself in a dangerous position. By 1940, much of Europe had fallen under Nazi control. Germany occupied territories to the north. Italy, under Mussolini, stood to the south. On a map, Switzerland looked isolated, surrounded, vulnerable, and yet, it remained independent. This has led many people to ask the same question. Why didn't Germany invade Switzerland? The answer is more complicated than it first appears. Contrary to popular belief, Germany did consider the possibility. Military planners even developed a proposal known as Operation Tannenbaum, a plan for a potential invasion of Switzerland. But planning an invasion and carrying one out are very different things. Because Switzerland presented a unique challenge. Its geography favored defenders, its military was prepared for mobilization, and its infrastructure had been designed with defense in mind. More importantly, Germany was already fighting a massive war across Europe. Every military decision required resources, time, equipment, manpower. And for Germany, the question wasn't simply, can we invade Switzerland? The question was, is it worth it? And that's where Switzerland's strategy began to work. Not by becoming impossible to conquer, but by becoming difficult enough to discourage conquest. However, the mountains were only part of the story, because Switzerland had been preparing for something much bigger, a plan hidden deep inside the Alps. For decades, Swiss military planners had considered a difficult possibility. What if an invasion couldn't be stopped at the border? What if an enemy entered the country? Their answer became known as the National Raid-Out. Instead of defending every piece of territory equally, Swiss forces planned to fall back into the mountains. Key bridges could be destroyed. Important tunnels could be blocked. Mountain passes could be sealed. Entire transportation routes could become unusable. The goal wasn't necessarily to prevent an invasion. The goal was to make occupation incredibly difficult. Even if an enemy advanced, the fight wouldn't be over. It would simply move higher into the Alps. From there, defenders could continue resisting from heavily fortified positions built into the mountains themselves. The strategy sent a clear message. Taking Switzerland might be possible. Holding it would be another matter entirely. But Switzerland wasn't relying only on military fortifications. The country was preparing in another way as well. Beneath Switzerland lies an enormous network of shelters and protective infrastructure. Over the decades, civil defense became an important national priority. Thousands of shelters were constructed, some hidden inside mountains, others integrated into ordinary buildings. The idea was simple: preparation, not panic. Preparation. By the Cold War, Switzerland had developed one of the world's most extensive shelter systems. Enough space existed to protect nearly the entire population. That level of preparation reflected something deeper than military planning. It reflected a national mindset, a belief that security should never be taken for granted. Military service also played an important role. Large numbers of citizens received training and remained part of reserve forces. The result was a country that viewed defense not as the responsibility of a small professional army alone, but as a shared responsibility. And gradually, Switzerland built a reputation for readiness, a reputation for resilience, and a reputation that potential enemies could not ignore. So, is Switzerland impossible to invade? No. No country is truly impossible to invade. History has shown that. But that was never the real question. The real question is this: would invading Switzerland be worth the cost? For centuries, Switzerland worked to make that answer as difficult as possible. Its mountains created natural barriers. Its military prepared for resistance. Its infrastructure was designed with defense in mind. Its population embraced readiness. And its leaders understood a simple principle: security isn't created by a single weapon or a single fortress. It's created by making aggression seem like a bad investment. That doesn't mean Switzerland is invincible. It doesn't mean history couldn't have unfolded differently, but it does help explain why, despite living in one of the most turbulent regions in history, Switzerland remained independent while so many others did not. In the end, Switzerland's greatest defense was never a bunker, or a mountain, or even an army. It was a strategy. A strategy designed to convince potential enemies that victory would cost more than it was worth. And for generations, that strategy worked. If you enjoy exploring the stories hidden behind maps, borders, and nations, subscribe to Borderless. There are many more stories waiting to be discovered.